Before we begin, listener, remember to gently tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Tonight, I'll take you through the quiet halls where the walls still breathe, where every sound means something, even when no one's there to make it. 5 stories, each one a whisper left behind by those who never truly left. So, turn down the lights, lie still, and listen carefully, because some sounds don't stop when you wake up. I arrived at St. Augustine Military Hospital long after the sun had folded into the Atlantic. The air reeked of salt, rust, and something faintly medicinal, a ghost of disinfectant clinging to brick and bone. The locals had warned me, no one enters after midnight, not since the quarantine of 1968, when the southern wing was sealed beneath concrete and prayer. The corridor was a throat of shadow. My flashlight skated across faded murals, nurses with hollow eyes, painted halos cracking under mildew. Somewhere beyond the operating room, a faint hiss began, mechanical, steady. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then came the whisper, a low, rhythmic murmur, words folding over themselves in Latin. Miserere nobis. It wasn't playing from any speaker. It was rising from the vents, as if the building itself were breathing, praying for something long forgotten. And under that prayer, a second sound began. A wheeze. Wet, labored, almost human. The sound followed me down the hall like a scent. Each breath of it seemed to pulse with the old pipes that ran beneath the floorboards. The deeper I walked, the more it shaped itself, syllables taking form, like a voice learning how to speak again. St. Augustine had always carried its ghosts. From the Spanish fort to the Mission Nombre de Dios, the town was built on prayers and graves. I'd read about the hospital's darker legend, how, during the war, a group of quarantined soldiers had been sealed inside when infection spread. The chaplain refused to leave them. They said his final sermon echoed through the vents for weeks after the last body was taken out. I aimed my camera down the corridor, snapping photos just to keep my hands from trembling. The flash lit up everything in sharp, sterile detail, dust swirling like ash, metal railings streaked with old fingerprints. On one wall, a crucifix hung upside down, its shadow bent against the plaster. When I checked the preview screen, I froze. Every photo showed the same faint distortion, a blur, hovering by the far door, just at the edge of the frame. I hadn't seen anything with my eyes, but the lens had. The chanting swelled louder now, layered, not one voice but many, rising and falling together, like waves striking the coast. My recorder, clipped to my jacket, began to pick up static faint patterns that almost resembled breathing. I reached the end of the corridor, where a steel door bore a fading sign, Isolation Ward, Do Not Enter. The latch was rusted shut, but the air that leaked through was cold, not the cold of night, but the kind that carried rot and memory. Then, a sound I couldn't mistake, 3 slow knocks from the other side of the door. Measured, patient. My camera clicked again on its own. The screen went black. The knocks stopped as suddenly as they began. Only the silence remained thick, suspended, like something waiting to be heard. I leaned against the cold steel door. From the crack beneath it came a faint exhale, shallow, rhythmic, mechanical. It was unmistakably the sound of a respirator, dragging air into lungs that no longer existed. I told myself it was a trick of the old ventilation, some echo through forgotten ducts. But as I stepped back, my boot landed on something soft, a strip of cloth, yellowed and stiff, a hospital wristband. Printed on it was a date, June 14, 1968. The name was faded, but the last letters were clear enough to read, Son. My own surname. The hallway lights overhead flickered, not with electricity, but with something like breath, dimming and brightening in time with the hiss behind the door. Then, the prayer returned. Not distant now, but close, murmuring just beyond the steel. Pater Noster, qui es in caelis. Each phrase drawn out, trembling, as if whispered through water. The air grew heavy. My recorder in my pocket started again on its own, its red light blinking faintly. The needle danced, though no wind touched the mic. The smell came next, not decay, but antiseptic and iodine, layered with the faint sweetness of rot. It was the scent of a ward, preserved in its own death. I pressed my ear to the metal. Something moved inside, a slow scrape, like fabric dragged over tile. Then another breath, longer, wet. The voice followed, quieter now. Libera nos, I whispered back before I could stop myself. From what way? The chanting paused. For a moment the world held its breath. Even the sea outside seemed to forget to move. Then a faint tapping began, not from the door, from the pipes behind the wall. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. A rhythm that almost sounded like Morse code. I pulled out my notebook, scribbling the pattern, translating it the way I'd been taught years ago. MERCY. My stomach clenched. I turned to leave, but the corridor had changed. The exit sign at the far end flickered, then went out completely. The air was thicker now, as if the whole building were drawing in one long breath. And somewhere above me, through the cracked ceiling, through the ducts, through the walls, came the sound of 1,000 lungs inhaling at once. Then, a single, unified whisper, Miserere nobis. My recorder fell silent. The door clicked, unlocked itself, and the prayer on the other side began again, louder, desperate, as if begging to be heard. The handle was cold enough to sting. When I pushed, the door yielded with a soft groan, not resistance, but regret. A narrow beam of my flashlight cut through a fog of dust, revealing rows of beds, perfectly aligned like soldiers awaiting orders. White sheets covered each one, but the fabric was too still, too heavy. The air was dense with the sound of machines that shouldn't exist anymore. A faint, pulsing rhythm, the inhale and exhale of mechanical lungs filled the ward. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, vibrating through the floor, through my ribs. I took one step inside. The temperature dropped, breath fogged in the beam of my light, curling like smoke. At the far end, a crucifix hung sideways, its brass tarnished with age. Beneath it, a small altar, a cracked basin, a candle fused to wax, long dry. Someone had written words into the dust across its surface. Stay quiet, they're still praying. The chanting began again, stronger this time, moving through the room in waves. It wasn't one voice. It was a chorus, dozens, maybe hundreds, their tone fractured and uneven, each word echoing half a second behind the other, creating an endless cycle of plea upon plea. I lifted my camera. Flash. For an instant, the beds were empty. Flash again, and the sheets had changed shape. as though something beneath them had shifted. My breath caught. I lowered the camera and heard it. The soft sound of fabric creasing, a single bed moving, then another. A chain reaction, one after another, until the entire ward seemed to be stirring. My flashlight dimmed. Its circle of light shrank, swallowed by the dark. The smell of iron thickened. "Who's here?" I whispered. The prayers stopped mid-syllable. Silence. Then, from every bed, came the same faint exhale, wet, trembling, labored. The floor creaked behind me. I turned sharply, but the doorway had vanished, just a black stretch of wall where I'd entered. The recorder in my pocket flicked on again by itself. The playback hissed, then spoke my own voice. "Recorded seconds ago. Who's here?" "Well, to filth." A pause. Then a new voice answered, low, hoarse, barely human. "We are." As self-incumberer. The air pressed against me. The respirator rhythm quickened, a dozen at once, as if the ward was gasping for breath. I stumbled back, knocking over a tray. The sound echoed far too long, as if bouncing through tunnels beneath the floor. And then, from beneath the beds, came the tapping again, Morse-like, urgent. I knelt, bringing the recorder close to the ground. "Help us." The whisper came not from the device, but from the air itself. It carried weight, a vibration that sank into the chest, into the bone. I raised my camera once more. The flash erupted, and this time, every sheet on every bed had collapsed inward, as if something invisible had drawn breath beneath them all at once. The prayer returned, not in Latin now, but in English. "Forgive us." I dropped the camera. Its lens shattered, yet from the shards came one last reflection. Dozens of faces turned toward me, mouths open mid-prayer, eyes hollow but glistening. And then nothing. Every sound stopped. The air emptied. A single monitor beeped once sharp, mechanical, final. Then silence. When the light came back, I was on the floor. The beds were still. The chanting had vanished. Only the faint hum of the air vents remained soft, constant, almost kind. I stood up slowly, gripping the camera by its broken strap. The air had changed. It was warmer now, carrying the smell of dust and faint bleach. For a moment, it felt normal. I glanced around. The crucifix had righted itself on the wall. The altar was bare. No words in the dust. No shapes under the sheets. Had I blacked out? My watch had stopped at 3:03 a.m. I pressed the playback button on my recorder. Static hissed, then nothing. The entire tape, an hour of whispers and prayers, was blank. Just empty white noise, like the hush of the sea. I exhaled. The sound of my breath reassured me. It was steady, human. I told myself I'd imagined it, the moving beds, the voice, the door that vanished. Sleep deprivation, maybe carbon monoxide. I'd been inside too long. The exit was easy to find this time. The same steel door stood open, and beyond it, the corridor was bathed in a weak, amber light leaking from somewhere outside. As I stepped through, the air shifted lighter, fresher, like dawn approaching. I remember thinking, I made it. The hospital behind me was just a carcass, now a relic of war. Stripped of its haunting, I walked through the courtyard toward my car. The cobblestones glistened under mist. Palm shadows lay twisted across the asphalt. From the distance came the cry of a gull, fragile, alive. I laughed under my breath, the sound foreign to my own ears. At the gate, I paused to take one last picture. The old sign still read St. Augustine Military Hospital, restricted area. I lifted the camera, half expecting it to jam again. But the shutter clicked smoothly, almost too smoothly. A small comfort. A proof that the nightmare had been just that. Driving back along San Marco Avenue, the streetlights glowed like dull amber eyes. I rolled the window down, letting salt air fill the car, washing away the sterile scent that clung to my clothes. By the time I reached my hotel near Castillo de San Marcos, dawn had begun to silver the rooftops. I fell onto the bed without undressing, the recorder still in my pocket. For the first time that night, silence felt natural. Until a sound. Faint, familiar. A low exhale. Then another. A mechanical rhythm, slow and deliberate, filling the room as if the walls were breathing. I sat up. The recorder on the bedside table blinked red. It had turned itself on again. Through the static came the faint echo of a voice my own, whispering words I hadn't spoken tonight. We are still praying. Dawn never truly came. When I opened my eyes, the world was gray, not night, not morning, but something in between. The recorder still blinked beside me, its red light steady now, like a heartbeat refusing to die. I pressed play. At first, only static. Then the sound unfolded the same rhythm, the same labored breathing from the ward. But this time it wasn't alone. Beneath it, faint but unmistakable, was the sound of footsteps. Mine. Walking back, a chill rooted in my spine. I checked the display. The timestamp was 4:12 a.m., nearly an hour after I'd already left the hospital. Some part of me already knew what that meant. I dressed, grabbed the camera and the recorder, and stepped into the morning fog. The town was silent, as if St. Augustine itself was holding its breath. I followed the road north again, past the old fort, through the mangroves, until the shape of the hospital loomed against the lightless sky. The gates hung open, as if waiting. Inside, everything was exactly as before. The air carried that same faint sweetness of decay and medicine. The corridor lights flickered once, then steadied. No prayer this time, no movement. Just the sound of my own footsteps echoing back too quickly, like someone walking beside me, half a second late. I reached the isolation ward. The door I'd left open was closed again. The letters on the sign were clearer now, as if scrubbed clean. Isolation ward. Mercy room. I pushed the door. It opened easily. Inside, the beds were gone. The room was empty except for the altar beneath the crucifix. On it lay the broken pieces of my camera lens, arranged in a perfect circle. And in the center, my recorder playing by itself. Voices filled the air. Dozens. Not chanting anymore, but weeping. Each voice distinct, yet blending into one collective lament. They weren't asking for forgiveness now. They were asking to be remembered. "Who are you?" I whispered. The air thickened. The candle on the altar flickered to life without flame. Its light wasn't warm. It was white, clinical, like the pulse of a heart monitor. Through the reflection on the lens shards, I saw movement behind me, figures in old medical gowns, faces hidden by gauze. Each stood beside a bed that no longer existed, hands folded as if in prayer. One of them stepped forward, the outline of a priest, his collar dark with age. His voice was thin, almost mechanical. We prayed to be saved, he said. But no one came. The door was sealed, and we were left to drown in our own lungs. Wordastigast. The breathing sound rose again, but it wasn't from the walls anymore, it was from within me, sinking to my pulse, my ribs aching as if something beneath them wanted to escape. They forgot us, he continued. So we prayed to be heard. And now you hear us, constented to the path. I'm not supposed to. He raised a hand. The recorder's static cut to silence. Then a single phrase, clear, resonant, spoken in my own voice. Finish the prayer. Why? The figures closed in, their outlines flickering with the pulse of the candle. The air trembled. I could feel every breath, every plea pressing against my skin. I lifted the recorder. My fingers shook, but I spoke. Miserere nobis. The words left my mouth like smoke, fragile, dissolving. But the effect was immediate. The light expanded, washing the walls in pale gold. One by one, the figures began to fade, their outlines softening, mouths still moving in silent thanks. The priest was the last. He placed his hand over my heart cold, weightless, and whispered, "Mercy granted, behaved grained." Then he was gone. The ward fell silent. For the first time, the air was still. When I stepped outside, the sun had broken through the mist. The sea beyond the walls shimmered faintly, and the wind carried a single echo, not a prayer, but a sigh. At the gate, I looked back one last time. The sign had changed. It no longer read military hospital. Just 2 words carved into the rusted plate. Mercy room. I pressed stop on my recorder. The tape clicked, ending its cycle. But as I walked away, I could swear beneath the hiss of the sea, I heard the faintest whisper following me. Finish the next one. It has been 3 months since I left St. Augustine. I've written the report, filed the photos, deleted most of them. My editor called the piece The Forgotten Ward. He's silver. It went viral for a week. Then people moved on. They always do. I told myself I'd moved on too. I rented a small apartment in Jacksonville, near the river. The air here smells clean brine, magnolia, rain. I keep my recorder in a drawer I never open. But at night, the air shifts. Soft, measured, like the beginning of a prayer. Sometimes I wake to the sound of breathing in the next room. Not frantic, not hostile, just slow, mechanical, like someone keeping rhythm for me. I check the vents, the hallway, the water pipes. Nothing. Once, I caught it clearly, a whisper through the air conditioner. Miserere nobis. It was faint, as if spoken from another time, another lung. I tried recording it again, just to prove it wasn't real. But the playback only gave me silence until the last second, when a voice, low and identical to mine, said, "Finish the prayer. What is for?" Now, whenever I close my eyes, I see the ward, not as it was, but as it might be, clean, bright, waiting, beds lined in symmetry, sheets folded, every pillow empty. And in the silence between my breaths, I hear them breathe. Sometimes I breathe back. Story 2. The chapel beneath the hill. They told me the chapel was buried beneath the mountain itself. No maps showed it, only a faded blueprint found in the Ravenswood Veterans Asylum. A building that had been silent since 1974, when the last patient walked into the woods and never returned. The locals spoke about the bells. 3 tolls, every midnight. Always 3. Even when the chapel was sealed, even when snow buried its roof, the sound still rose through the earth like a heartbeat remembering itself. I arrived at dusk. The mountains were pale and brittle, the sky heavy with frost. Ravenswood stood against the slope like a scar of brick and iron. Inside, the air was colder than the snow outside, dry, still, old. My boots echoed through corridors lined with rusted wheelchairs and broken hymn books. Then, as the last light sank beyond the ridge, the first bell rang. The sound was deep, not metal against metal, but something softer, like breath drawn through bone. The walls trembled, and from far below, where the mountain's shadow met the earth, came a whisper that was not wind, et lox perpetua luceat eyes. The second bell struck while I was still unpacking my gear. It didn't echo the way real bells do. It seemed to absorb sound rather than throw it back. A low, wet vibration that sank through the floorboards and into my bones. I followed the sound down a stairwell that twisted below the main ward. The steps were slick with condensation, the walls flaking in thick curls of paint. The color of bone. Someone had carved words into the plaster prayers, fragments of scripture, scratched deep enough to draw blood. At the bottom, a corridor stretched toward darkness. The air was colder here, heavier, carrying a faint sweetness like candle wax and mildew. Every few meters, a metal door stood ajar, leading into empty treatment rooms. Old crucifixes hung over the door frames, but most had fallen, their nails bent, their crosses hanging upside down. I stopped at one room where a rusted IV stand leaned beside a kneeling bench. On the wall behind it, a sentence had been etched into the plaster. We prayed until our tongues went numb. And so are. The third bell rang. This time, it wasn't distant. It came from below me, a hollow tone rising through the floor, like the earth itself had lungs. Dust fell from the ceiling, drifting in the beam of my flashlight. The air began to move. A current, faint but steady, brushing against my neck as though the corridor were inhaling. I found a narrow hatch behind a row of rusted lockers. Someone had welded it shut, then sealed the edges with melted wax, old, dark, brittle. The wax had symbols pressed into it, crosses, circles, and something that looked like an eye, half closed. The temperature dropped further. My breath fogged the air. I pressed my ear to the hatch. From the other side came a sound, not a bell this time, but the faint rustle of robes, the murmur of many voices speaking in unison. I couldn't make out the words, only the cadence rising and falling like tidewater, almost soothing. Almost. Then, just as I turned to leave, a single whisper cut through the chorus, clear, deliberate. It spoke my name. The recorder on my shoulder clicked itself on. The hatch shuddered when I touched it. Once, then again, as though something beneath it had breathed out. The wax along its edge cracked, releasing a faint hiss. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming to a trembling circle of amber light. I stepped back. The metal surface seemed to pulse, not from vibration, but from light trapped within, moving behind it like a heartbeat. When the fourth bell rang, it didn't sound through the air. It sounded inside the walls. Every brick, every inch of floor trembled in rhythm, the vibration pulling at the fillings in my teeth. I looked down. The seams between the tiles had filled with dark moisture water, or something thicker. The smell of iron flooded the corridor. I swung my light around. and for a moment, the shadow cast by my arm didn't follow. It lingered on the wall, a second longer than it should have, its shape slower to move, as if deciding whether to stay. The air turned bright. Not light in the usual sense, it was as if the darkness itself had thinned, made luminous from within. The walls glowed faintly blue, veins of light crawling beneath the paint, tracing the outlines of crosses, circles, and faces that weren't carved there a moment ago. Then the floor dropped an inch. Just a tremor, but enough to send dust raining down like ash. My knees nearly buckled. The recorder on my chest began to hum, though I hadn't touched it. Its screen flickered words scrolling across, erratic, forming and unforming. Beneath, come beneath. I should have run. Instead, I pressed my hand to the hatch again. The metal burned cold. A thin slit of light bled from beneath, a white so pure it was colorless. The kind of light you see before fainting. My fingers trembled. The pulse from the other side matched mine. Then the hatch clicked. It didn't open outward or inward. It folded. The edges curled inward like paper catching fire, vanishing into themselves until there was no door, only an opening, circular, pulsing with light that rippled like water. From the hole came wind, but not air. It was sound made solid, vibrating enough to stir the dust into columns that twisted like fingers. The light shifted from white to gold, from gold to crimson, and in that crimson hue, the corridor changed. The lockers were gone. The walls were clean, too clean, white as bleached bone. Candles burned along the floor, their flames motionless, each casting a shadow that pointed inward toward the opening. I looked back for the stairs, but the passage had closed behind me. Only the faint outline of a cross shimmered where the door had been upside down, trembling like a reflection on water. The bell rang again a fifth time, and the light pulsed outward, washing over everything. For a heartbeat, the world went flat. No depth, no distance. Just a single, perfect note vibrating through every atom of air. Then I heard the whisper again, the one that knew my name. This time it wasn't behind the door. It was behind my eyes. The air inside the opening was not air at all. It had weight, dense, humming, alive. When I stepped through, the world behind me folded shut without a sound. I found myself in a chamber carved directly into the mountain's heart. Stone walls rose around me, like the ribs of some ancient creature. The ceiling was high, vaulted, streaked with veins of quartz that glowed faintly, not from reflection, but from vibration. Each pulse of light was accompanied by a hum just below hearing, like the drone of an unseen choir. At the center stood an altar. It wasn't made of stone or wood, but of stacked metal plates, each engraved with numbers, symbols, fragments of Latin scripture. The plates were connected by frayed copper wires that led into the walls, a machine disguised as devotion. This was no ordinary chapel. I stepped closer. On one of the plates, a small plaque bore an inscription. U.S. Signal Corps Experimental Unit, 1945. Below it, in smaller letters, Project Sanctum Vox. My pulse quickened. I had read rumors of such projects' attempts during wartime to weaponize prayer, to harness resonance frequencies from mass chanting to induce calm or hysteria, but the files had all been lost. Except here. The fifth bell sounded again, but now I could see it. A large bronze shell hung suspended by chains over the altar, split down the middle, its interior lined with wires and small glass tubes. As it rang, the light in the quartz veins pulsed in time, sound transformed into motion. I lifted my recorder, holding it toward the bell. The hum rose, forming words, fragmented, distorted. Faith through frequency, soul through sound. The voice wasn't singular. It was many voices, layered scientists, priests, soldiers, all overlapping like a single entity speaking through time. I reached out and touched one of the wires. It was still warm. Immediately, the walls responded. The quartz veins flared gold. Symbols appeared where there had been bare rock crosses, equations, anatomical sketches of lungs and throats. The sound deepened into a steady chant, Latin woven through English, faith fused with formula. Then the lights shifted again, red, blue, white, repeating, as if mimicking the sequence of a heartbeat monitor. I stumbled back, realizing the terrible truth. This place had been built to record prayer. Not metaphorically, physically. Every word spoken in desperation during the war, every dying breath, captured and trapped in crystal. That was the sound I'd been hearing all along. Not spirits, but stored agony, repeating forever in a closed system of faith and frequency. But as the hum swelled, another thought took root, something colder. What if the prayers were still being powered? The altar trembled, the wires hissed, my recorder's screen flared white, symbols scrolling faster than I could read. Signal active. Transmission looped. Source human. I tore the device away, but the voice continued, now free of any speaker. Do not end it, it whispered. Every repetition keeps them alive. End self. The bell overhead rang a sixth time, deep enough to make the air ripple. The plates beneath my feet began to shift, sliding apart to reveal a pit beneath the altar, its depth swallowed by red light. And from that pit rose the sound of breathing, thousands of breaths rising together. The mountain itself was inhaling. The hum reached a fever pitch, every surface trembling under its own resonance. I stumbled toward the altar, searching for anything that could stop the current. The wires coiled across the floor like veins, pulsing faintly with light. On the far side of the machine, a control panel half buried in stone blinked with a single green diode. Beneath it, a switch. It was labeled simply, Loop Control. I hesitated. My fingers hovered above it. The voices in the air were still chanting, a sound caught between prayer and static. The bell above groaned, its chains straining as if the metal itself were alive. I whispered maybe to them, maybe to myself, I'm ending this. 1. The switch flipped with a soft click. Silence. For the first time since I entered the chamber, everything stopped. The quartz veins dimmed. The bronze bell fell still. My recorder went dark. The air grew warm again, soft and dry. Dust drifted lazily through a shaft of light falling from a crack above. The scent of stone and old wax replaced the metallic tang of electricity. It was over. I sank to my knees beside the altar, chest heaving. My heartbeat filled the emptiness that the chant had left behind. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt small. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. I rose and looked toward the hatchway I'd entered from. It was open again, a perfect circle of darkness leading back to the corridor above. As I stepped closer, the air behind me shifted. A faint tremor ran through the floor. Then another. I froze. The quartz veins glimmered once, faintly, then brightened not with the sharp pulse of electricity, but the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of breath. The light spread, flowing up the walls like blood returning to a dead limb. The stone creaked, not cracking, but flexing, as if the entire mountain had lungs. I stumbled backward, staring as dust lifted in columns, swirling upward in perfect unison, drawn into invisible currents. A low bass note filled the chamber. It wasn't the bell this time. It came from everywhere, from the rock, the ceiling, the air itself. A heartbeat, deep and resonant. Then came the inhale. The wind sucked inward through the opening, pulling at my clothes, drawing everything toward the altar. I grabbed a rusted beam for balance, but the pressure was immense, a living vacuum, an ancient lung reclaiming its first breath in 70 years. The bronze bell above the altar began to tremble again, though I hadn't touched the switch. Its split halves vibrated until they rejoined, sealing themselves in a smooth sphere of molten light. From deep within the rock, another sound answered. A chorus. Thousands of voices whispering the same line over and over. We are still within the prayer. Tracked. The control panel sparked once, the green diode burning bright white before bursting. The mountain exhaled. The gust threw me to the ground. The air that rushed past smelled of ash, salt, and something older than rot, the breath of a tomb opened too long. I crawled toward the hatch. Behind me, the altar's light began to move, climbing the walls like fire without flame, forming the vague shape of a human chest expanding, contracting. Every breath the mountain took matched my own. Every inhale pulled at my lungs. Every exhale left me dizzy, as if it was drawing my air too. I managed to drag myself through the hatchway just as the 7th bell rang. The corridor beyond was shaking, dust falling like snow, yet the hum had softened again, slower now, gentler, as though the mountain had fallen asleep. I looked back once. Through the opening, I saw the light still pulsing within the rock. The mountain was breathing. And somewhere, deep below, the prayer began again, but this time, it sounded alive. The mountain's breath had steadied into rhythm, deep, patient, eternal. Each inhale drew the dust upward in spirals. Each exhale sent pebbles skittering down the corridor, like prayer beads counting themselves. I stumbled forward through the collapsing passage, the air so dense it pushed against my chest. The light from the chamber still pulsed behind me, red, white, gold, each color fading into the next, like the turning of some vast celestial wheel. I didn't look back, but the sound followed. The prayer had changed again. It was no longer many voices, only one now, clearer, stronger, echoing with the timbre of something ancient. It wasn't speaking Latin anymore. It was speaking through me. Every step made my bones hum. Every breath I took filled my ears with whispers, the cadence of rosaries, the rhythm of heart monitors, the sound of breath remembered after death. I reached the stairwell, the path I'd taken down. It was intact again, impossibly so straight, clean, leading upward into pale light. Halfway up, I stopped. My recorder was vibrating against my chest, though it was turned off. I took it out, and the screen flashed a single word: listen. The moment I did, everything stilled. The hum of the mountain faded, the air thinned, and I heard them. Not ghosts, not echoes, lives. Every voice was a memory soldier's crying for morphine, nurses whispering prayers, priests shouting orders through static, all of them woven into a single, endless loop, each plea bleeding into the next. The prayer had never stopped. It had simply learned to continue without breath. I reached the top of the stairs, bursting into the main ward of Ravenswood. Morning light spilled through cracked windows. The snow outside was brilliant, unbroken, peaceful. The sound was gone. The mountain was still. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe I'd escaped. I walked to the entrance, the air sharp and cold. Outside, the world waited the highway, the trees, the sky. I stepped out, each crunch of snow underfoot, loud and solid. Then I felt it a warmth against my ribs, faint but steady. A second heartbeat. I froze. The air around me shimmered faintly, bending light the way heat does. And from that shimmer came a whisper so soft I might have mistaken it for the wind. Miserere nobis. I turned back toward the asylum. Its walls were quiet, still, but in the glass of the upper windows, I saw movement, faint ripples of light, pulsing in rhythm with my breath. I lifted the recorder. The red light blinked again on its own. Static filled the air. Then my own voice spoke from within. Every repetition keeps them alive. To nines. I dropped it into the snow. The sound didn't stop. It came from inside, now behind my teeth, beneath my tongue. I covered my mouth, but the words continued, muffled but clear. Et lux perpetua luceat ice. 2. Light eternal. The world grew brighter, too bright to bear. The sky, the snow, the walls, all white, all humming, all breathing in unison. My body grew lighter, my thoughts dimmed, as if the mountain was pulling at what little of me remained. In the last flicker of awareness, I saw the sun cresting over the hill. For a moment, it looked like the altar's light, same color, same pulse. Then I realized the truth. The mountain wasn't alive. It was listening. And now, so was I. The recording was found 3 weeks later by a geological survey team from Denver University. They had been cataloging abandoned Cold War structures when they stumbled upon the ruins of Ravenswood Asylum. According to their report, the building had partially collapsed, half swallowed by the hillside. The main wards were inaccessible, yet a faint tone, low, rhythmic, mechanical, could still be heard through the stone. They followed it down a fractured stairwell that ended in a sealed chamber. Inside, they found the recorder. It was still running. The batteries had long corroded, yet the device emitted a steady red light, pulsing in slow intervals once every 6 seconds, like breath. The audio was retrieved, corrupted but playable. The first 2 minutes were silent. Then came the sound of wind, followed by a single human voice. It was calm, familiar, male. The same journalist whose name was written on the press pass found beside it. "This is not an echo," the voice said. "This is the mountain learning to speak." A pause. Then the faint toll of a bell 3 times. Underneath it, other voices emerged, layered and distant, repeating in perfect rhythm with the pulse of the red light. Not pleading, not crying, praying. The final words on the tape were almost inaudible, buried under static, yet transcribers later confirmed the phrase was Latin. Et lux perpetua luceat ice, and let perpetual light shine upon them. The survey team sealed the chamber again. The recorder was sent to storage at the National Archives. According to the report, the device has not stopped blinking since. Story 3. The Corridor of Breath. It began with the tape from Ravenswood. They'd sent it to me for analysis. An old field recorder found sealed beneath the Colorado hills, still blinking after all these years. I was told it captured nothing but static. Yet, when I played it, I heard breathing. Not recorded breathing. Responsive breathing. Every time I inhaled, the sound inhaled with me. Every exhale followed half a second later, like an echo buried in the lungs of someone I couldn't see. I traced the signal to its origin, Burnhaven Hospital, Illinois. The building had been closed since 1972 after a fire in the West Wing. They said the heat fused glass into the walls, and the smell of smoke never left. I arrived at dusk. The sky was the color of bruised copper. Wind moved through the open corridors, carrying a scent of iodine and char. And somewhere inside, faint but distinct, came the sound again, a rasping inhale, shallow and patient. When I held my breath, it stopped. When I breathed again, it answered. The first thing I noticed was the warmth. Not the warmth of air, but of skin, as if the corridor itself had a pulse, faint but rhythmic, pressing against my body in shallow waves. The walls were slick, sweating with condensation. Each droplet slid down slowly, tracing veins through the dust. The further I walked, the heavier the air became dense, moist, tasting faintly of iron and ash. I switched on the recorder. The screen blinked once, then displayed a faint graph, shallow peaks, low valleys, breathing. Not mine, something slower, older. Each time I inhaled, the pressure around me changed. The ceiling seemed to drop, the floor to rise, as if the building were expanding and contracting in sympathy. My chest tightened. My heart began to match the rhythm of the sound. Inhale. Exhale. Beat. Beat. The corridor curved slightly, leading toward the burned wing. Rusted doors lined both sides. Their handles melted into strange shapes. On one, the metal had warped into what looked almost like a face, mouth open, frozen mid-scream. I ran my hand along the wall. It was warm, unmistakably warm, like the skin of a living animal. When I pressed my palm harder, something pressed back. I jerked away. The sound changed. The breathing deepened no longer behind me, but around me, inside the walls, inside the air itself. Then came another sound, subtle, intimate, a heartbeat. Not steady, but searching, uncertain, like a child mimicking rhythm. The lights overhead flickered, their glow dim and yellow. Every time they buzzed, my vision pulsed black for an instant. And with each flicker, the air drew closer, brushing my face like a living hand. My mouth went dry. My ears popped. I realized I was breathing too fast. When I forced myself to slow down, the air slowed with me. When I stopped completely, holding my breath, everything fell silent. For that one impossible second, the world didn't move. Then, just as I gasped for air, the corridor exhaled a long, wet sigh that carried words I almost understood. Not speech? Something shaped like speech. I lifted the recorder to my mouth, voice shaking. Who's breathing? Man. The answer came instantly, whispered from every wall at once. You are Drax. The air began to vibrate. not with sound, but with pressure, a rhythm that found its way beneath my skin. Each breath I took made the corridor respond. The walls expanded when I inhaled, contracted when I exhaled. The lights above flickered in time, their glow fading and returning with every cycle of my lungs. Soon, I couldn't tell which rhythm was mine and which was the building's. It felt like breathing inside another body. The heat grew heavier. Sweat gathered along my back, trickling in perfect sync with the drops sliding down the wall beside me. My breath fogged the air, and the fog lingered. It didn't drift away. It pulsed. My fingers trembled. I pressed them against the plaster again. It yielded softly, warm and pliant. Beneath the surface came a faint ripple, as though the wall was filled with something liquid or alive. The recorder's mic light blinked in tempo with my heartbeat. It wasn't recording sound anymore. It was recording pulse. The static deepened, thickened, then resolved into a single, elongated inhalation that never ended. A breath drawn not into lungs, but through miles of tunnels, pipes, and stone. It was the hospital itself breathing centuries of trapped air moving through lungs of concrete. Then the floor began to move. Only slightly, a swell beneath my feet, slow and deliberate, like the rise of a sleeping giant's chest. The light along the walls shifted from amber to red, the same hue as the inside of a body seen through thin skin. I reached for my camera. My hands looked wrong, their edges blurred, vibrating faintly, like heat shimmer. Each movement left a faint delay, a second image trailing behind. When I tried to speak, my voice came out doubled one version inside my head, another echoing from the walls, half a second late. It was copying me. The breathing quickened. And so did mine. The corridor seemed to stretch forward infinitely now, each door swaying slightly in rhythm, their hinges sighing with every inhale. The sound was almost beautiful, like 1,000 people sleeping in perfect harmony. I stopped walking. The corridor didn't. It kept moving, sliding under my feet, pulling me forward, though I stood still. Something touched my neck, a thin stream of air, warm and damp, exhaling right against my skin. I turned. Nothing there, yet I could feel it still. When I reached back, my fingers met only space, but that space had texture, the faint resistance of a living surface. I gasped, and the air gasped with me. The next inhale wasn't mine. It was taken from me deep, heavy, pulling air straight from my mouth before I could resist. My chest collapsed, ribs aching. The recorder's screen flashed wildly, the waveform spiraling into a single vertical line. Then a voice, calm, layered within the hiss. The air remembers. I fell to my knees, lungs burning, vision black at the edges. The warmth around me intensified, and then, in one strange moment of clarity, I realized I wasn't suffocating. The building was breathing for me. Each inhale filled my lungs. Each exhale left through the vents above. I was part of it now, one organ among many, moving in rhythm with walls and dust and memory, and somewhere deep inside that endless breath, I thought I heard my own voice whispering back, "Don't stop," as the next thing I remember is crawling. Not walking, crawling, palms and knees scraping against the wet floor as though the ground itself wanted to keep me close. My flashlight lay somewhere behind me, its beam swinging lazily, casting ripples of light that moved like lungs, expanding and collapsing. Ahead, a faint glow bled from beneath a half-open door. The air around it quivered, the way heat trembles above asphalt, and with each flicker of that light came the sound, wet, deliberate, human. Breathing. Deep, regular, almost tender. I pushed the door open. Inside was a treatment ward, smaller than I expected, its walls scorched from the fire that had ended this place decades ago. The smell of smoke still lingered, woven into every surface. Along one wall stood a row of broken respirators, military issue, tagged USAF property, their tubes stiff with age. Except one. One machine still worked. It rose and fell, the rubber bladder expanding in perfect rhythm, a faint hiss marking every inhale, a mechanical sigh every exhale. But there were no wires, no power. I stepped closer, holding my breath. The machine responded. Its tempo quickened, matching my heartbeat. I reached out and touched the plastic mask. It was warm. A trace of condensation glimmered on the inside, as if someone had just breathed into it. Then I heard it, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Low, soft, somewhere beneath the floor. I knelt, pressing my ear to the ground. A pulse echoed up through the concrete, steady, massive, ancient. It wasn't the rhythm of one life, but of many layered together, like 100 hearts sharing one cadence. My recorder hissed back to life on its own, its light flickering pale green. The waveform danced wildly, forming shapes not random noise but patterns, words. I couldn't read them, but my body could feel them. Each vibration struck like a note through my ribs. The deeper the tone, the further inside it went through bone, through tissue, through thought. My vision swam. The world began to tilt. Then the machine exhaled sharply, a single violent hiss, and the room came alive. The respirators along the wall began to move one after another, their tubes twitching like serpents, their diaphragms inflating. Dust lifted in the air with each breath, forming pale silhouettes that hovered between the beds, figures half built of smoke and light. They weren't solid. They weren't gone, either. As the air thickened, the room's lights changed color, cycling through soft red and sickly white. Each pulse came with a memory. Images burned behind my eyes. Surgeons in gas masks, nurses reciting prayers in whispers, bodies wheeled down endless corridors, still breathing long after their hearts had stopped. I stumbled backward, clutching the recorder. It was heavier now, as though full of something living. Through the static, a voice pushed its way through broken, desperate, yet familiar. We tried to separate the air from the flesh. Will two men. Another voice joined. They thought breath was memory. Way. The respirators kept moving, faster now, an orchestra of lungs with no bodies. The walls groaned as pipes beneath the plaster expanded, swelling like veins about to burst. And then I saw it, a steel hatch in the corner of the ward, half concealed by fallen tiles. It pulsed faintly with light, the same dull red I'd seen in Ravenswood. Every instinct told me not to touch it, but the breathing was coming from there louder, fuller, pulling the air straight through my throat, as though the room had chosen me to inhale for it. I crawled toward it, shaking. The metal was warm beneath my fingers, almost tender. My reflection shimmered across its surface, warped by every breath. Behind me, the respirators began to chant hissing words through their tubes, shaping syllables that no living mouth could form. The voices layered, building toward a single plea that seemed to resonate directly through my chest. Stay. Finish the breath. and the hatch vibrated, the bolts creaking loose. From inside came light, pale fluid, rippling like lungs made of glass. For a moment, I thought I saw faces within it, not dead, not alive, just suspended between. Then the light surged forward, and I understood too late that the air was not being breathed. It was breathing us. When the light hit me, it wasn't hot, it was cold and clean, like the first inhale after drowning. It poured through the hatch, wrapped around my chest, filled my mouth and nose until all the air I had was replaced by it. Then, as suddenly as it came, the light dimmed. The hiss of the respirators faded one by one, each machine sighing into stillness. Silence. The corridor behind me was still again. The air was motionless, thin. I waited for the sound to return, but it didn't. The heartbeat beneath the floor had stopped. Every light in the room flickered once, then steadied their glow, soft and steady as candlelight. For a long time I didn't move. I sat against the wall, watching the last flecks of dust drift down through the fading beam. My skin tingled, as if every cell had been rubbed raw, but my lungs were cleaner than they had ever felt. Each breath came easily, no echo, no rhythm but my own. I thought I'd done it. I'd ended it. The recorder lay beside me, its light dead. I picked it up, pressed play, nothing. Static, then silence. The waveform was flat. I laughed. The sound startled me. It sounded human again. It sounded mine. I stood, stretching, feeling the blood return to my legs. The hatch was gone. The place where it had been was just smooth concrete, as though it had never existed. The walls were still warm to the touch, but that was only the lingering heat of the lights. I stepped out into the corridor. It looked almost ordinary now. No breathing walls, no pulsing shadows, just old plaster, cracked and flaking. A hallway in an abandoned hospital. I walked. My boots struck the floor with a solid, comforting rhythm. Each sound came back to me perfectly, one echo per step, nothing more. At the far end of the corridor, a window waited. Beyond it, daylight pale, weak, but real. When I pushed it open, the air outside rushed in, dry and cold, carrying the scent of ash trees and burnt paper. I took a deep breath of it. Pure, empty. The wind didn't answer. For the first time since Ravenswood, I felt free. Outside, the snow had started to fall. I crossed the courtyard, passing the ruins of the west wing, blackened bricks, twisted rebar, glass melted into strange shapes. Each step carried me farther from the echo, from the hum, from the breath that wasn't mine. I reached the gate, turned once to look back. Burnhaven stood silent. The air above it shimmered faintly in the cold, but it was only heat. I told myself heat rising from old stone. My recorder hung heavy around my neck, swinging against my chest. Its screen remained black. I ran my thumb over the buttons. Still nothing. Good. At the car, I sat for a moment with the engine off, listening. Nothing but wind, the steady click of cooling metal, my own pulse. I started the engine. The radio crackled once, and then found a station static, mixed with faint organ music. I almost smiled. It felt fitting. As I drove away, the hospital disappeared behind the trees, swallowed by mist. The further I went, the lighter I felt, as though the air had finally let me go. But halfway down the empty road, a faint hiss rose beneath the hum of the engine. A rhythm. breath. I turned the radio dial. The static deepened, shaping itself into a sound I knew too well. Inhale, exhale, slow, deliberate. I turned it off. The sound remained. It was inside the car now, subtle, steady, rising and falling with me. I put a hand to my chest. My lungs still worked, my heart still beat. But in the silence between them, I could hear another rhythm, slower, older, keeping perfect time beneath my own. And with each exhale, the glass of the windshield fogged. From the outside, the first fogged patch on the glass looked harmless, a faint bloom of moisture that faded as I rubbed it with my sleeve. But as I drove, another appeared beside it. Then another, each patch expanding, coalescing, until the inside of the windscreen blurred into pale, trembling breath. The heater was off, the windows sealed. I slowed the car, the tires crunching over frost. The mist thickened, and through it came a sound, quiet at first, then unmistakable, the same slow, idle respiration I had heard inside Burnhaven. Inhale, exhale. Not mine. I cut the engine. Silence swallowed everything. For a moment, I thought the breathing had stopped until the steering wheel beneath my palms pulsed once, twice, in rhythm with it. The car was breathing. The upholstery shifted under me, air moving through its seams like lungs exhaling. The dashboard creaked. A fine dust of frost fell from the roofliner, each flake spinning in rhythm with the sound. I stumbled out, gasping, half expecting the cold night to burn the sensation away. But the air outside moved with the same rhythm. Each gust of wind matched the pace of my lungs. The snow-covered trees along the roadside swayed not randomly, but together, as though caught in a single pulse. And beneath it all, so low I could feel it through my feet, came that ancient subterranean heartbeat. The mountain, it was still breathing. A low hum rolled across the valley, deep and resonant. The ground under my boots trembled, softening like something alive, shifting in its sleep. I turned back toward the direction of Burnhaven, miles behind me, now hidden behind fog. Through that gauze of mist, a faint red glow began to pulse steady, patient. Every time it brightened, the wind drew in. Every time it dimmed, it exhaled. I could feel it in my own body now, the tug of invisible lungs guiding every breath I took. I tried to resist, to hold it in, but my chest tightened until my ribs screamed. When I finally let the air go, the valley exhaled with me. The recorder around my neck flickered to life. No static this time, just the soft hiss of synchronized breathing, my own and something far larger, layered perfectly together. Then a voice, faint but clear. Inhale for us. One himself sighed. The sound came from everywhere, the trees, the car, the ground, the sky, the whole world breathing in harmony. I ran. Snow crunched beneath me, each step echoing like a heartbeat in my skull. My breath came ragged, uneven, but the rhythm around me corrected it. Every inhale pulled straight, every exhale lengthened, until I was moving in time again. The forest thinned. Ahead, an old ventilation shaft rose from the earth, a relic from the hospital's underground wards. Rusted metal, half buried in ice. From its mouth came a soft, warm wind. I shouldn't have gone closer. But something inside that current called to me, low and human. Whispers formed in the flow of air, Names, pleas, prayers. I recognized fragments of the voices from Ravenswood, from the chapel, the same looped cadence. I knelt beside the vent, feeling the warmth on my face. Every whisper rose with the air, brushed against my skin, then vanished into the cold night. The recorder's red light blinked faster. The waveform on its screen was no longer random. It had shape now, curved and symmetrical, like the cross-section of a lung. The wind shifted, and in that warm current, for just a heartbeat, I heard my own voice. Every breath keeps them alive. Ride. The light inside the shaft deepened from red to gold. Air surged upward, catching my coat, lifting the hair on my arms. The ground trembled again, this time not like an earthquake, but like something enormous turning over in sleep. I understood then. The mountain wasn't just breathing, it was learning to speak. The hum built, louder, filling the air until sound became weight. My ears rang, my vision blurred. The recorder in my hand grew hot, the plastic warping beneath my grip. Then, from deep inside the earth, came the final exhale, vast, cavernous, rolling through the valley like a storm. The trees bent, the snow rose in spirals. Every light, my cars, the recorders, the faint glow from Burnhaven flared white, blinding. And I saw them. Not ghosts, not figures, just outlines of movement within the air. Thousands of breaths, visible as thin veils of condensation, swirling together into one colossal shape. A lung, a heart, a body of air that stretched from mountain to sky. It inhaled. So did I. The recorder cracked, its casing splitting open, releasing a hiss like escaping steam. Inside, something glowed, a single shard of light, pulsing faintly in rhythm. The whisper came again, softer this time, almost kind. Stay. Finish the breath. And then, nothing but wind. They found the car 2 days later. Engine off, doors open, headlights dead. The snow around it had melted in a perfect circle, as if the heat had risen from the ground instead of the engine. Inside, there was no sign of me. Only the recorder, lying on the driver's seat. It was still warm to the touch. Investigators noted a faint, rhythmic vibration coming from within, like a heartbeat trapped inside a shell. When they played it back, there was no voice, no static, just a single, steady inhalation that never ended. For nearly 7 minutes, the recording breathed. Soft, calm, patient. Then, at the exact moment the waveform flattened, something else entered the sound, an echo, low and human, matching the tempo perfectly. Inhale for us. The words weren't spoken. They were formed by air itself, pressure shaping sound, sound shaping silence. The technician who transferred the file said she felt dizzy while listening, as though the room around her was moving. Another reported a sensation of warmth against her chest, as if someone stood too close, breathing with her. They tried isolating the signal. Every attempt failed. When the tape was stopped, the speakers continued to hum for several seconds after, emitting a pulse exactly 20 breaths per minute, the same average rate for a resting adult. The official report listed the cause of disappearance as unknown environmental exposure. The recorder was sealed, sent to the same archive that housed the Ravenswood tape. 3 months later, a night guard reported hearing breathing through the walls of the storage vault. When he pressed his ear to the concrete, a voice whispered quiet, calm, too close to be an echo. were still breathing, and Freyshans to deathed. Story 4. The Red Cross Shelter. The assignment came quietly, a request from a contact in Baton Rouge who'd read my reports on Ravenswood and Burnhaven. He said there was another site, older, forgotten, a Red Cross field shelter near the Louisiana-Mississippi border, built during the Gulf conflict and abandoned after a storm washed half of it into the bayou. Locals called it Camp Lament. They said the place still sighed when the wind turned south, a deep, wet sound like lungs filled with mud. I drove there at dusk. The sky was swollen purple, the air thick with humidity. Cicadas screamed in the trees, then fell silent all at once as I stepped from the car. The building was small, 3 rooms, walls sinking into soft ground. The Red Cross emblem faded to a ghostly pink. Inside, the floorboards creaked beneath layers of dried mud. Medical cots lined the walls, their sheets long melted into rags. And then I heard it faint, rhythmic, from somewhere below the floor. A soft, mewling cry. Not human exactly, but close. I crouched, pressing my ear to the boards. The sound stopped. Then a voice whispered from beneath the wood, breathless and pleading. "Help us, they're still waiting." The boards under my hands were damp, soft with rot. The air carried the sour smell of old medicine, blood, and swamp water. When I leaned closer, the whisper came again, softer, trembling, a child's pitch, but with the diction of an adult. "Please, they're still waiting." "Why?" I knocked on the floor. The echo that returned was hollow. There was space beneath me, a crawlway, maybe a cellar, but the shelter's blueprints showed nothing of the sort. It had been built on stilts, not foundations. My flashlight caught something beneath the cot, nearest the corner, a small patch of floor where the wood had warped upward, like breath pushing from below. I pressed it with my boot. It moved slightly, as if something beneath was exhaling. The air grew warmer. Moisture beaded on the walls, tiny droplets forming and rolling down like sweat. The cicadas outside began again, but faintly, as though the world had moved a mile away. I knelt and pried at the warped plank with my pocket knife. The wood split easily. A rush of cold air hit me sharp, damp, earthy. It smelled of iron and stagnant water. The cry returned, louder now. Closer. I shone my light into the gap. Below the floor lay an open space, maybe 2 meters deep, a chamber made of brick and rusted iron pipes. The light caught fragments of fabric, white cloth, neatly folded, each bundle the size of a small pillow, dozens of them. Each one wrapped tight, tagged with dates, scrawled in faded red ink. All the same date. August 16, 1991. Something shifted in the dark, a faint ripple through the bundles, like wind passing through leaves. And then the whisper returned, multiplied now, layered. "Help us, help them, it's not over." And the floor under me swelled once, the wood bending upward like lungs drawing air. Then it exhaled a long, shuddering sigh that sent dust spiraling through the light. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and for a moment I could swear I saw one of the cloth bundles move twitch, almost imperceptibly, as if something inside had turned its head. The recorder on my belt clicked on by itself. Through the static came the faintest sound, not crying, not wind. Breathing. Shallow, wet, endless. And behind it, another voice, older, quieter, speaking from somewhere far below the earth. We buried mercy here, as Icarius. The whisper became rhythm. It rose through the floor in waves, a pulse of sound that matched my heartbeat exactly. The air thickened with it, pressing against my chest until each inhale felt borrowed. I tore up another plank. Beneath it, the chamber spread further than I'd thought, a tunnel running the length of the shelter, its walls lined with those white bundles. Some had split open, revealing the glint of glass jars beneath the cloth, each sealed and filled with murky liquid. Inside floated tiny shapes, not bones, not insects, smaller, something embryonic. As my light swept across them, the jars began to tremble. Tiny bubbles rose within, bursting softly against the glass, in perfect rhythm with the breathing. Then the first jar cracked. A faint hiss escaped, followed by a sigh, a sound too human to belong to anything inanimate. The others joined. Cracks spiderwebbed across every jar, the air filling with the sharp scent of formalin and something far older decay, salt, birth. The bundles twitched again. This time, some unfurled. Inside each lay a smaller cloth, stained and damp, the outlines unmistakable. Limbs curled, mouths open, silent but still moving. The whispers turned to murmurs, then to cries. I stumbled backward, the recorder hissing in my hand, picking up layers of overlapping voices. Between them, a phrase repeated endlessly: male, female, child, all speaking the same line. They only wanted to breathe, he asked. The air above the pit shimmered, and from within rose a faint white mist, swirling like the ghost of a breath held too long. It reached me before I could move, cold and damp against my face, sliding down my throat. My lungs seized. I couldn't breathe, not because there was no air, but because the air wasn't mine anymore. Every inhale felt shared. Every exhale answered. Then, through the mist, I saw them. Figures rising from the pit. Not flesh, but condensation. Pale silhouettes of mothers, doctors, nurses, each holding something small, wrapped in white. Their mouths moved in silent rhythm. Their eyes glowed faintly from within, lit by some memory of mercy that had never been granted. The walls began to hum, deep and resonant. The cross above the door tilted, its nail snapping loose, the emblem falling to the floor. And over it all, one final sound filled the shelter, a heartbeat. Steady, slow, not mine. It was the earth itself, inhaling again. The heartbeat did not stop. It moved through the ground like thunder trapped beneath the soil, slow, patient, ancient. The floorboards trembled with each pulse, dust drifting upward in tiny spirals. I stood in the center of the shelter, the recorder dangling from my hand, its mic light flickering weakly. Each flash illuminated the bundles below, and with every blink, more of them had opened. The air smelled of salt, blood, and wet fabric. A faint shimmer rose from the pit-white mist, rolling upward in steady rhythm with the sound. When it touched the ceiling, it didn't dissipate. It stayed, rippling like breath against glass. Then the mist began to take shape. Figures emerged, faint outlines forming from condensation and shadow. Nurses in torn aprons, soldiers with their faces half burned, and among them, the smallest children wrapped in gauze, heads too heavy for their necks. None of them solid, but all of them moving, exhaling in perfect unison. Each inhalation made the room expand slightly, the walls shifting outward, the air warm and wet. Each exhalation drew everything closer, as if the entire shelter were breathing through them. My skin prickled, my chest tightened. I could feel my heartbeat faltering, syncing with theirs. One of the nurses, or what used to be one, turned toward me. Her eyes glowed faintly from within, like candlelight behind wet paper. When she spoke, her voice came not from her mouth but from the recorder still hanging at my chest. "We saved what we could. Tracks." The sound made the metal casing tremble. The voice was layered, not one, but hundreds threaded into one sentence. I took a step back. "Saved what?" I whispered. The answer came immediately. "The breath. I will tension." The chamber below pulsed again, louder this time. The jars began to burst, one by one, each releasing a short, sharp exhalation. The vapor rose and joined the mist, thickening the air until it glowed faintly in the dark. Every breath added to it. Every fragment of sound made the shelter swell. And then the floor cracked. A split raced across the boards, widening with a sound like lungs tearing. Through it, light seeped, not white, not fire, but the dull red of blood seen through thin skin. I knelt, shining my flashlight into the opening. Beneath the shelter wasn't a crawl space, after all. It was a chamber carved into the earth, lined with mirrors, and in every reflection, I saw myself dozens of versions, each one moving half a second late. When I inhaled, they inhaled. When I exhaled, they hesitated, then finished the breath I started. The light pulsed again, and their mouths moved, forming words I didn't speak. "Stay. We cannot breathe without you. Track today." My lungs seized. I fell forward, gasping. The air around me turned heavy, almost liquid, and for a moment I could see what I was breathing, tiny motes of light swirling, each one a fragment of something once alive. I tried to crawl toward the door, but it had vanished, replaced by a wall slick with condensation. The Red Cross emblem painted there was bleeding down, its color spreading like fresh wound. Behind me, the whispering grew frantic. The figures pressed closer, their bodies collapsing into mist, merging with the air that filled the room. Each one exhaled through me, my chest rising and falling without consent. The recorder blazed white. Static screamed through it, and beneath that static, one voice surfaced, calm, deliberate. "You carry mercy now. It's Stan." The lights overhead exploded. The darkness that followed wasn't empty, it moved. Every sound, every echo, every drop of water was breathing. And somewhere, beyond the walls, the swamp answered back, a vast inhalation that shook the ground. I dropped the recorder. It hit the floor and rolled toward the pit, still glowing. Its red light blinked once, twice, then stayed lit. Below, something opened its eyes. When I woke, the light had changed. It was morning, or something close to it. A soft, gold haze filtered through the cracks in the roof, illuminating the room in broken pieces. The recorder lay beside me, its light off at last. The air was still again, cool and clean, carrying only the faint scent of wet earth and salt. No heartbeat, no whisper, no breath but my own. For a while, I stayed there on the floor, waiting for the room to move again. It didn't. Everything was exactly as it should have been, quiet, abandoned, dead. The bundles below had vanished. In their place lay fragments of cloth, brittle as old paper. I brushed one with my finger, and it disintegrated, leaving nothing but a thin trace of gray ash. Had it happened at all? Had I fainted, imagined it? The recorder's display was blank. The tape inside had melted, fused into a smooth disk of plastic. Whatever had been captured was gone. I took a deep breath, real air, sharp and metallic. It filled my lungs in a single, clean rush, almost painful in its purity. Outside, the cicadas had returned. The world sounded alive again. I stepped into the courtyard. The shelter looked different in daylight, smaller, almost harmless. The Red Cross sign above the door caught the morning sun, its faded red warming back to color. For a moment, it felt like release. I set the recorder down on the hood of my car and leaned against the metal, letting the warmth seep into my back. A soft breeze moved through the bayou, stirring the long grass. The swamp smelled of life water, rot, and green things growing. I laughed once, quietly. It sounded human again. Then I noticed the air. It was too still. The breeze had stopped, frozen mid-motion. Even the insects had gone silent. The warmth drained from the sunlight as though a shadow had passed over the sun. I turned back toward the shelter. The doorway gaped open, darker now, not black, but deep red, like the color of lungs when light passes through them. From inside came a faint sigh. Long, slow, familiar. I told myself it was the wind finding its way through broken vents. I told myself it wasn't real. But when I exhaled, the sound repeated. Perfectly. My breath lingered in the air, a white plume that didn't fade. It hung there, motionless, suspended between me and the doorway. Then, slowly, it began to move backward, sliding toward the shelter, as if the building were inhaling it. The recorder clicked on. Its light blinked once, then steadied. Static filled the silence, followed by a sound that made my skin crawl, the soft, wet exhale of something waking. I took a step back. The ground pulsed beneath my feet. The shelter was breathing again. Every plank along its frame expanded and contracted in rhythm, the metal roof groaning with each inhale. The Red Cross emblem gleamed in the dim light, no longer faded, bright crimson, wet, alive. And then the whisper returned. Not beneath the floor this time, but inside my head. We saved what we could, chasing. I stumbled to the car, slammed the door, and started the engine. The recorder's light still burned on the dashboard, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. As I drove away, I looked once in the mirror. The shelter had sunk deeper into the earth, its roof barely visible above the waterline. Each time I blinked, it seemed to breathe again, rising slightly, then settling. I rolled down the window. The wind rushed in, cool and alive. For a moment, it drowned out everything. Then the sound found me again, faint, rhythmic, hidden beneath the noise of the engine. Breathing. It came from the vents, from the air itself. I turned up the radio, but the static only shaped the sound into words. You carry mercy now. Well, the road out of Camp Lament was little more than a narrow line of cracked asphalt cutting through the swamp. Cypress roots jutted up like bones beneath the mist, and the water on either side pulsed faintly with reflected light, the same dull red that had bled from the shelter's walls. I drove without direction, without sound, the recorder still glowing faintly on the seat beside me. Every few seconds, it pulsed. Every pulse matched my heart. The steering wheel felt soft beneath my palms, damp, as though the heat of my hands had seeped into it too deeply. When I exhaled, condensation fogged the inside of the windscreen. When I inhaled, it cleared. I knew what that meant. I was still connected. The recorder hissed faint static that rose and fell with my breath. Somewhere in that hiss, I could hear the murmurs again. Not words this time, just the rhythm of people breathing together, hundreds of lungs, thousands, exhaling in slow unison. It felt like a choir of air. I stopped the car. The silence pressed against me, thick as water. I picked up the recorder, thumb hovering over the eject switch. "Not this time," I whispered. But before I could move, the static deepened. The red light flared bright enough to fill the car with a pulse of color, and through the noise came a single phrase, whispered by 100 voices at once. "Return the mercy." As the world outside shifted. The trees on either side of the road began to sway, not in wind, but in rhythm. The mist above the swamp drew inward, coiling around the car, glowing faintly. The ground beneath the tires trembled. Then, beneath the surface of the water, something moved. A long exhale rippled across the bayou, breaking the reflection of the moon into 100 red fragments. And from that broken light, faces emerged, faint, translucent, barely formed. Nurses, mothers, children, all breathing, all facing me. I stepped out of the car, my boots sinking into the mud. The air was humid and thick, vibrating against my skin like a low hum. The whispers gathered again. "We saved what we could." "I think so." We kept their breath. "Well, when we will stargaze." "Now return it." "Why?" The recorder pulsed faster, the static growing sharp, almost percussive. I dropped to my knees, clutching it. The pressure in my chest mounted until I could barely draw air. Every breath I took came back heavier, slower, borrowed. The swamp exhaled with me, a warm gust that smelled of brine and decay. And then, the air began to move on its own. It curled around my face, tugging softly at my mouth, drawing out the air before I could keep it. I fell forward, choking. The recorder hit the ground, its light flashing brighter with every heartbeat. The water in front of me boiled, not with heat, but with breath. Bubbles rose to the surface, each one bursting with a tiny sigh. The figures in the mist grew clearer. A woman stood closest, her face half-shadowed, her eyes hollow. She held a small bundle wrapped in cloth, its surface faintly rising and falling. Her voice came from the air around me, from the mud, from the water. "We cannot rest while they still breathe. Tu alterast." The others joined, their words overlapping until meaning dissolved into rhythm. The sound was no longer outside me. It was through me. Every inhalation scraped my throat raw. Every exhalation felt stolen. My body trembled with the effort to resist, but the air refused to leave me alone. It wasn't suffocating me. It was using me. The red glow rose from the swamp, spreading like sunrise through the mist. The shelter was gone now, swallowed completely, but the water still rose and fell, as though a vast lung beneath the surface was pulling the world into itself. I pressed the recorder to my chest. "Take it," I said hoarsely. "Take it back. Ken self." The light flared once more, and in that brightness, I felt every breath I had ever taken tear loose from my ribs, each one escaping into the air like ribbons of steam. The world dimmed. The whispers quieted. For the first time in what felt like days, the swamp was still. I fell backward into the mud, lungs empty, ears ringing with silence. The recorder lay beside me, its light fading to a soft amber. The sky above was pale again, not red, not gold, just morning gray. Birds screamed somewhere in the distance. I took a breath. It was mine. I took another. Still mine. And then, just as the sun touched the edge of the trees, a soft sound rose from the swamp, a new exhale, gentle and endless. The water rippled outward in time with my breathing. The red light flickered once more on the recorder. Then it whispered, faint and familiar, "You returned it. Now let us breathe. No Fang." The swamp inhaled, and I disappeared into the echo. 3 months later, a wildlife survey team found my car deep in the bayou, engine rusted through, half sunk in the water. The ignition key was still in place. The passenger door hung open. Inside, the recorder rested on the dashboard. Its red light pulsed once every 6 seconds, steady, deliberate, like a living heartbeat. When the lead surveyor pressed play, the device responded instantly. No static, no distortion, just breathing. Slow, wet, patient. The recording lasted 2 minutes. Toward the end, another breath joined the first lighter, higher, answering it perfectly. 2 lungs moving together. The final seconds contained a whisper, faint but distinct. A man's voice, calm, familiar. They can breathe now. The team sealed the recorder in a containment bag and sent it to Baton Rouge for analysis. But when technicians replayed the tape, the file was gone, overwritten by new sound, captured hours after the recorder had been recovered. The new recording was faint but clear, the hum of cicadas, the rustle of reeds, and a heartbeat buried somewhere deep beneath them. One technician, listening through headphones, said she could hear words in that heartbeat, a rhythm that shaped itself into speech when slowed down. She refused to play it again. In her report, she wrote only 1 line before resigning the next morning. "The shelter is breathing. Quite." Story 5. The Ocean Ward. They call it the Ocean Ward, a naval infirmary lost to the tide. Half of it still stands above the surface, its decks tilted and corroded, the other half swallowed by black water where the waves refuse to break. Locals say it hums at night. Not creaking metal, not the tide. A melody, faint, continuous, like a choir singing beneath the surface. I came because of the recordings. Fishermen near Crescent Bay had picked up something strange on sonar, a pattern too precise to be current, too human to be coincidence, a heartbeat wrapped in song. When my boat reached the wreck, the sea was unnervingly calm. No wind, no surf, no gulls. Only that slow rhythm beneath the hull, a low vibration that crawled into my chest, making my pulse stutter to match it. The air tasted of salt and rust. The deck moaned under my weight. Somewhere below, I could hear it, a woman's voice. Soft, distant, singing words that didn't belong to any language I knew notes too long, too pure, trembling like prayer. And when I pressed my ear to the metal, the voice stopped singing and whispered instead, "You're late. We've been waiting. Bye." The whisper slipped through the steel like breath through cloth. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, just the echo of the waves shifting beneath the hull. But the sea was still. The air didn't move. Only the faint vibration of the voice lingered, pulsing through the metal into my jaw, into my teeth, until it became impossible to tell where my own heartbeat ended and hers began. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Salt filled my nose, thick and metallic. Every exhale left a film on my lips, as though the air itself had weight. When I tried to speak, the sound came back to me half a second later, distorted, stretched a repetition that wasn't mine. The singing started again. Faint at first, below the deck, where the infirmary sank into darkness. A melody built from long, descending tones, each one trembling at the edge of human range, the kind of pitch that lives between sound and thought. It was beautiful and wrong. Every note touched something deep in the chest, the place where fear and longing share the same breath. I found the stairwell and began to descend. My flashlight flickered across the walls, catching flashes of movement, water sliding upward instead of down, droplets rising like reversed rain. The lower deck was half flooded. My boots broke the surface, sending slow ripples across the water. Each ripple came back faster than it should have, as though the reflection beneath was impatient. The melody deepened. A second voice joined the first fainter, echoing from another direction, then another. Soon the air itself seemed to hum, the corridor alive with sound, vibrating at a frequency that made my vision shimmer. My skin prickled. Sweat rolled down my spine, cold as seawater. I followed the sound toward the ward's central chamber. The door hung open, its hinges eaten by rust. Inside, rows of surgical tables floated, their straps dangling like seaweed. A single bulb swung gently overhead, though there was no wind to move it. The song grew louder, clearer, circling me. The voices overlapped now, weaving words that weren't words, syllables that scraped against the edges of meaning, like prayers in a language older than faith. Then, between the notes, came a whisper close enough to brush my ear. We learned to breathe beneath the water. Within marques of us, my flashlight flickered out. In the darkness, the song changed. The melody fell into dissonance, still beautiful, but fractured, trembling on the edge of grief. And beneath it all, I heard something else. Not singing. Not words. Breathing. Wet. Ragged. Human. Coming from the water at my feet. When I looked down, I saw bubbles rising in perfect rhythm with my heartbeat. The first bubble broke the surface like a sigh, then another, and another, each one swelling larger, rising faster, until the water around my boots shivered like something breathing beneath it. I took a step back. The surface calmed instantly. The song above me dimmed to a hum, the melody folding in on itself like a secret withheld. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then a single, piercing note. It vibrated through the floor, up my legs, through my spine, into my skull. My vision blurred. My teeth ached, as if the sound were drilling through bone. The water rippled again, and this time I saw it move in perfect rhythm with the tone, every pulse of sound forming a visible wave. The sea was singing back. The corridor walls began to sweat. Droplets crawled upward instead of down, merging into thin streams that slithered toward the ceiling. The steel itself began to hum, resonating at the same pitch as the voice. I wanted to run, but my body refused. The song was inside me now, not heard, but felt blooming behind my ribs, my pulse aligned with its rhythm. Each beat came slower, heavier, more deliberate. I waded deeper into the flooded ward. The water reached my knees, cold and viscous, thick like oil. My reflection floated beneath me, pale, distorted, eyes wide. Then it blinked. I gasped and stumbled back. My reflection didn't follow. It stood upright beneath the water, its chest rising and falling, its mouth open in silent song. The melody changed again. It grew sweeter, higher, almost tender. I knew it was meant to soothe me, but each note carried the subtle ache of something dying. Around me, more reflections appeared, faint shapes standing just below the surface, swaying in time with the music. They had no faces, only soft outlines of mouths moving as one. The whispers returned, threading through the song. Sing, breathe, remember, well. My body obeyed before I could think. I inhaled sharply. Salt flooded my mouth. My lungs burned not from lack of air, but from too much of it, like the sea itself was trying to fill me. The figures beneath the water moved closer. The melody rose to a fever pitch, vibrating through my bones until I felt hollow, my body an instrument for their sound. Then I realized the truth. They weren't singing to me. They were singing through me. My throat convulsed. The air inside me shifted heavy, liquid, echoing with voices that weren't mine. When I tried to scream, what came out was melody. The same long, drowning note, stretched too far, too pure to belong to the living. The ship itself responded. The walls bowed inward, the deck shuddered, and the air filled with the metallic scent of rust and blood. The lights flickered red, then blue, then white, like a heartbeat rendered in color. The sound deepened, layered upon itself, folding into harmony so vast it swallowed thought. The water rose higher. The reflections climbed with it. They were smiling now, not in joy, but in relief. I felt my body sway with theirs, my voice blending into the hymn that had no end. Every note carried a fragment of something I'd never known: grief, peace, forgiveness, memory. The corridor walls throbbed in rhythm. The air itself seemed to pulse. And then, beneath the harmony, one clear voice surfaced, a woman's, calm and steady, right beside my ear. Now you remember. Well, I won self from this playing. The sound cut off. Everything stopped. No water, no song. Just silence and the echo of breath mine, alone trembling in the still air of the ocean ward. Silence. But not the kind that brings peace, the kind that hums just beneath hearing, so heavy it feels alive. I stood ankle deep in the flooded ward, drenched in sweat that felt colder than the sea itself. The air smelled like rust, iodine, and something sweet, too sweet, like the breath of something long dead. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Its beam touched the water, and the reflections beneath me shifted again. They weren't just shadows now. They were watching. Everywhere I turned, faces rippled across the surface, blurred, fluid, half-formed, eyes that blinked without lids, mouths that opened but did not breathe. When I stepped back, the water followed a slow ripple that lapped against my boots like a pulse echoing my fear. Then the singing returned, not from below this time, but from within the walls. It began softly, like wind humming through pipes, but there was structure, verses, repetition, intent. The words weren't human, but my mind tried to understand them anyway. Each note carried meaning beyond language. Sorrow stretched into sound. Hope dissolved into vibration. I realized I was shaking, not from fear, but from the resonance inside my bones. The song wasn't just filling the space. It was using it. The ship itself was an instrument, each beam and bolt vibrating like strings under invisible hands. I pressed my palm to the wall. It was warm, too warm. Beneath the rust, I felt movement, a subtle rhythm, as though veins ran beneath the metal, carrying sound instead of blood. The melody rose, filling my ears, my skull, the hollow space behind my eyes. The air thickened, trembling with every note until I could no longer hear, only feel. Then, as if the sound had reached its breaking point, it stopped. The stillness that followed was worse than the noise, because beneath that stillness came another sound, small, fragile, unmistakable. Footsteps. I turned toward the corridor. Something moved in the darkness, slow, deliberate, knee-deep in the black water. Each step came with a soft ripple, a whispering exhale that seemed to answer the rhythm of my own breathing. I raised the flashlight. A figure stood at the far end of the ward. At first, I thought it was a woman. Her shape was slender, hair floating around her head like ink in water. But her face wasn't right. It was smooth, featureless, as though erased. Still, when she tilted her head, I felt her see me. The singing returned, just one voice now, hers. Low, resonant, impossibly close. My ribs ached, every note pressed inward, squeezing my lungs from the inside. I staggered, choking on air that had turned too thick to swallow. "Who are you?" I managed to gasp. The answer came not in words, but through the recorder clipped to my belt. It clicked on by itself, its red light flickering like a pulse. Through the static, her voice whispered, calm, melodic, terrible. "We are what they left behind. Trapper Disley." The water stirred violently. The figures beneath the surface rose, half-formed bodies of light and salt, their mouths open in silent harmony. The song grew louder, vibrating the air until every molecule around me seemed to move. I covered my ears, but the sound was inside me now, echoing behind my heartbeat. Every face turned toward me at once. Every mouth moved in perfect unison. Sing. Haze? I tried to run, but the water clung to my legs like hands. It pulled me backward, toward the center of the ward, toward the figure who now stood inches away. She lifted a finger to where her lips should have been a gesture of silence. Then she leaned forward, and from the blank space where her mouth should be came the faintest whisper, "Breathe for us. True has met her." The air vanished. The world became sound. My body convulsed, once a reflex, the final gasp before drowning, and the moment I inhaled, their breath entered me. Light flooded the ward, gold and red and deep ocean blue, swirling through the water like veins of fire. The ship groaned under the weight of it, as if awakening after a long, fevered sleep. And then I understood. The song wasn't summoning something. It was something, and now it had found a voice. Mine. When I opened my eyes, the world was quiet again. The light was gone. The ship was still. Only the slow lapping of the tide against the hull remained steady, human in rhythm, like breath after panic. I lay on the cold floor, soaked in salt water and sweat. The recorder had stopped blinking. The air was heavy, but breathable. For the first time since I'd entered the ocean ward, I felt alone. No voices, no song, no pulse in the metal. I sat up slowly. Every sound I made seemed too loud, the creak of my boots, the rasp of my breath. My reflection in the water was whole again, dull and human, eyes wide but my own. It was over. It had to be. I climbed the stairs back toward the main deck. Each step echoed cleanly, no delay, no echo singing back to me. The air grew cooler as I rose, the scent of rust giving way to salt and wind. When I reached the top, daylight burned across the horizon, the kind of light that feels like forgiveness. The ocean lay flat and endless, perfectly calm. No voices in the air, no movement below, only the hush of distance. I stood at the railing, breathing deep. My lungs ached, raw from the night before, but each breath was mine again, real, imperfect, alive. I laughed once, softly. The sound broke the quiet, scattered across the surface of the sea, harmless. The wind shifted. Something warm brushed my face, gentle, like a sigh. I turned. Nothing. Only empty deck. Then I heard it. Very faint, almost swallowed by the wind. A melody. Not the same as before, slower now, softer, woven through the sound of the waves. A single voice, humming the last line of a hymn I'd never learned. I tried to tell myself it was memory. Residual sound. A trick of exhaustion. But when I exhaled, the note wavered. When I inhaled again, it continued perfectly timed to my breath. The sound wasn't coming from the sea this time. It was coming from me. I pressed a hand to my chest. My heartbeat was there, but faint like an echo trapped inside another rhythm. The recorder on my belt clicked softly, unprompted. Its red light blinked once. Through the static came a whisper, calm and almost tender. You carried the song, and we salve. I froze. The wind dropped again, the world too still. From somewhere below the deck came a single note, low, resonant, metallic. It rang through the hull, like the first bell of a service long forgotten. Then another, and another. 3 notes. The same as the heartbeat pattern I'd heard on the sonar weeks ago. The ship was awake again. The water against the hull began to move in rhythm, inhale, exhale, deep and endless. My breath caught, desperate to stay separate, but every time I tried to stop, the air inside me rebelled, pulling me back into the cycle. When I looked down at the waves, they were no longer flat. They rose and fell in perfect time with my chest. The whisper came again right beside my ear, though the deck was empty. Don't leave us silent. And so, I staggered back, heart pounding. The recorder's red light pulsed faster, matching every beat, until the whole world seemed to blink in time with it. Then, beneath the sound of my breath, faint but growing clearer, the melody returned. It was no longer outside me. It was inside me, humming through blood and bone, endless and calm. I sank to my knees, staring at the horizon where the sea met the light. Somewhere far below, deep within the drowned half of the ship, a choir began to sing again, slow, solemn, impossibly beautiful. And every note began and ended with my breath. It began with the light. Not dawn, not real light, but a pulse that came from beneath the water, rising through the hull in slow, rhythmic flashes. Red, gold, blue, each color breathing in time with my lungs. I tried to stand, but the deck tilted beneath me, groaning as if the ship itself had drawn another breath. Bolts strained. The steel ribs beneath the boards flexed like muscle. The ocean wasn't still anymore. Waves rose in sync with the light, each crest breaking without sound. The air grew dense, shimmering, vibrating like a plucked string. When I inhaled, the ship inhaled. When I exhaled, the sea followed. Something deep below was alive. The recorder vibrated against my chest, its red light strobing with impossible precision, 20 breaths per minute. The human resting rate, my resting rate. Through the static came the first voice, distorted but familiar. My voice. You carried the song. Then others joined fragments of the drowned, the nurses, the voices from every place I had ever followed the breath. Ravenswood, Burnhaven, the shelter, all of them, layered, rising, calling back through the water. We never stopped the prayer. You remember now. Sing. I fell to my knees. The vibration shook the ship around me, water spraying through the seams like sweat from living skin. The deck rippled, the planks softening under my palms. Beneath my hands, the steel was warm, pulsing. The ship wasn't dying. It was breathing. I crawled toward the stairwell that led below deck. Every instinct screamed to run the other way, but the melody low, harmonic, impossibly human was pulling me down. Each step I took descended into deeper rhythm. My heart pounded in counterpoint, trying and failing to find its own tempo. The water below glowed faintly, golden and thick. Every ripple carried a shape outlines of hands, faces, bodies, all moving in the slow motion of dreams. They weren't solid, but they were there. The song shifted again. Now it was clearer, brighter, almost sacred. A hymn. The language was still unknown, but this time I could understand it not as words, but as emotion pressed directly into the body. Grief. Relief. Need. They were asking me to finish it. The recorder's static grew louder. Between the distortion, I could hear breath, thousands of lungs moving as one. The walls echoed the rhythm, the sea answering each inhale with a crash that never broke. When I reached the central ward, the water was waist-deep and glowing softly from below. The surgical tables floated in neat rows, shifting gently in time with the melody. Above them, the air shimmered. From that shimmer, shapes began to form, bodies made of light and salt water, their edges dissolving into mist, faces that flickered between ages, between genders, between memory and oblivion. They looked at me, all of them, and when they exhaled, the sound that filled the room was not song. It was breath, the raw sound of life, forced through something that has forgotten how to live. The pressure crushed my ears. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, choking on air that was no longer mine. The figures moved closer, their mouths opened in silent chorus. Through the blinding hum, I heard the woman's voice, the one that had first called to me through the hull. We gave our breath to save theirs. Now breathe it back. Have. The light in the water flared. Every figure dissolved into it, merging with the sea itself. The air burned cold against my skin. I screamed, but the sound came out wrong, not pain, but harmony. My voice joined theirs without consent. My body became part of the resonance, each cell vibrating, breaking, reforming in rhythm with the song. The deck split open. The water surged upward, swallowing everything in light. And for one terrible, beautiful moment. I was the ocean ward. I felt the weight of all the lungs that had once breathed here, all the voices silenced by salt, all the prayers left unfinished. Each one pressed through me, through my ribs, through the last air I owned. The melody peaked no longer human, no longer sound, just motion, just life. And in that instant, I understood. They weren't haunting the sea. They were the sea. Every tide, every storm, every whisper of wind was then the breath of what humanity had abandoned, endlessly returning to the shore, asking to be heard. The recorder's light burned white. Its casing cracked, spilling heat into my hand. Then, through the roar of light and water, one voice remained quiet, final, tender. Now you remember why you came. And the sea inhaled, and I disappeared into its breath. 3 weeks later, a Coast Guard patrol near Crescent Bay reported an anomaly. To self. The sea, they said, was singing. Not the roar of wind or the churn of engines. This was rhythmic, melodic, unmistakably human. They followed the sound to the wreck of the ocean ward, which now floated higher in the water than it had for 50 years, as if something beneath was holding it up. The deck was empty. No equipment, no body. Only a small recorder, half melted from heat, resting where the captain's chair should have been. Its light still blinked faint, steady, once every 6 seconds. When the patrol chief played the recording, he heard nothing for the first 30 seconds. Then came a voice, male, calm, breathing steadily between words. The sea remembers what mercy sounds like. A pause. Then, faintly behind it, the echo of another voice, higher, melodic, distant, as if sung through miles of water. We never stopped the prayer. The chief stopped the playback immediately, but the sound didn't stop. Even with the recorder unplugged, the speakers kept humming, vibrating at a pitch just below hearing deep enough to make the walls of the patrol vessel tremble. That night, several crew members reported dreams of drowning, not suffocating, but breathing water like air. Each awoke with salt crusting their lips and the faint taste of rust in their mouths. By morning, the ocean ward was gone. Not sunk, gone. Only the sea remained flat, glassy, pulsing gently, as if something vast beneath it was still inhaling. The final line in the Coast Guard's report was written by hand, the ink blurred by water damage. It read, "We recorded nothing, but the sea still sings, rests. Before you sleep, listener, take one more breath. You've heard their voices, the words, the prayers, the songs that refused to die. They were never haunting you. They were remembering you. If the air feels heavier now, it's only because the world is still breathing through you. Tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next breath that rises from the dark. Rest now. And if you hear someone whisper your name tonight, don't be afraid. It's just the world, exhaling